Let me start at the outset by trying to define the problem that we're going to be addressing today. We generally seem to have two kinds of experiences when we hear a piece of music that seems to have a lot of outside notes, or as we've described them in part 1, chromatic notes. Now the first experience is we seem to like it because there seem to be a lot of deviations from the usual, but then we struggle to replicate it on our instrument. By which I mean, when we try to incorporate it in our playing, or let's say in one of our tunes, we end up doing a lot of experimentation before hitting the right set of notes that seem to sound good to our ears. Now the second experience is that sometimes we feel these chromatic notes are just too odd sounding, and in fact, instead of generating interest, they seem to put us off. Strangely, some of our other friends seem to make more sense of the same piece and it seems to sound okay to them. Now the specific answer to point 1 is that a bit of music theory can help enormously in a practical situation. The specific answer to point 2 is lack of repetitive exposure of such chromatic movements in our daily dose of hearing and playing. Now remember, our playing feeds our ears and our brain. Now our brain in many ways is similar to an intelligent computer program. The more music we hear, the more musical data that gets stored in it. Similarly, the more such chromatic movements we hear, the more such chromatic movements that get stored in our memory. And our brain is then able to search it up the next time we hear something similar. And in fact, if it draws up a parallel, what happens is that the same piece of music that seemed to sound odd now seems to sound okay. Now in this lesson series, my focus hence will be on problem 1. I'll try to address it by trying ways to incorporate it in our playing. Now remember, our playing is feeding our ears and brains, and indirectly it'll give our brain some of that exposure, the required exposure, to start addressing problem 2. Now as promised, let's start with that bit of music theory that can help enormously. One way to incorporate chromaticism in our playing immediately would be to understand the basics of phrasing. Phrasing depends on two things, that's rhythm and note choice. There's a line here and it goes, which accented beat gets what note? Which accented beat gets what note? Now this line captures the key aspects of phrasing. The first part is actually to do with rhythm and the second part is to do with note choice. Now there's a word here called accent that I want to explain a bit. Now in a typical 4-beat cycle, each beat gets an accent or emphasis. Now there are two simple ways to give accent to a note or a beat. One is to increase or decrease the intensity of the note, and 2 is to create a differentiation in the texture of the sound. Now there's a word that I'm going to be using to double up for accent, and that is strength. Now beat 1, as you can see in this 4-beat cycle, is the strongest beat and is symbolized by a caps S. Beat 2 is weaker than beat 1 and is symbolized by a caps W. Beat 3 is also a strong beat, but isn't as strong as beat 1 and is hence symbolized by a small s. Beat 4 similarly is the weakest beat of all 4 and is weaker than beat 2, which is symbolized by caps W. Now, there could be one way of vocalizing this beat structure this way. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you can clearly hear me increasing the accents or the intensity of beat 1 and 3, but what's not happening that clearly is that I'm not able to differentiate beats 1 and 3. Now from a drummer's perspective, if we assign kick to beat 1 and make it sound like this, duk, and we assign hi-hat to beat 2 going tss, assigning snare to beat 3 going tuck, and assigning hi-hat to beat 4 going tss again, the beat structure now vocalized would sound like this. Duk, tss, tuck, tss, duk, tss, tuck, tss, duk, tss, tuck, tss, duk, tss, tuck, tss. Now here you can hear not only the intensity of beats 1 and 3, beats 1 and 3 are sounding like the strong beats and hence getting accented one way, but also you can differentiate them because of the different sounds of the kick and snare. The beats 2 and 4, being the weak beats, have the soft sounding hi-hat, and both of them are not as differentiated because both of them are being sung with the choice of hi-hat sound. Now let's look at our first example, which is a phrase in a minor key. Now recall from the previous section that in a typical 4-beat cycle, the two strong beats were beat 1 and beat 3. In this example, we'll be highlighting beat 3. Let's look at the structure of this example. It's got two bars of music, bar 1 and bar 2. I'll be playing two progressions today. The first progression is C augmented played on beat 1 of bar 1, then followed by E minor chord on the and of beat 2. The E minor chord lasts for the rest of the bar. Then on beat 1 of bar 2, I play the root chord A minor. Now A minor is going to be the key of our choice for today's discussion. Let's quickly hear this progression to build a sound for it in our heads. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Stop. Now what I want to do is I want to swap this A minor chord with this chromatic phrase instead. First, let's look at the rhythmic structure of this phrase. It goes something like this: 1 and 2 and 3. 1 and 2 and 3. And if you notice, the note on beat 3 gets 2 beats. It's called a half note. When compared to the previous or the preceding notes, which get just half a beat each. Now, what you see here is called solfege syllables, and these solfege syllables are very useful in singing any melody in the language of music. Now in the key of A minor, that is A minor that we've chosen today, this phrase would sound something like this. 1 and 2 and 3. 1 and 2 and 3, or play 1 and 2 and 3. Now what you see here is the same solfege syllables translated into notes in the key of A minor, that is G sharp, A sharp, B and C. Now let me swap A minor with this melodic phrase, and in context it will sound something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2. Okay, now what I'm going to do is play the next progression, that is B diminished, E major going to A minor, and then the A minor will again get replaced by this phrase, and we want to hear this phrase against the second progression. Let's build the sound for the second progression in our heads first. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. Stop. As before, we'll replace A minor with this phrase. Let's see how it sounds. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3. Now, what I want to do is I want to try and understand why is this phrase chromatic in the first place. Now, against both these progressions, this particular note that you see in solfege syllable, that is D or A sharp, isn't contained in any of these 5 chords, that is C augmented, E minor, E major, B diminished or A minor. And hence, in the context of these two progressions, this particular note turns out to be a chromatic or outside note, and when we hear the sound of it, we get this feeling that it's slightly outside, as compared to the context that was developed for us in the backdrop. So now let's quickly understand why this phrase, this chromatic phrase, sounded good in the backdrop of these two progressions rather. So looking at the key expression which said which accented beat, now that's the first part of our phrase. So as decided, we wanted to highlight beat 3, but how did we do that? And therein lies an interesting third strategy which we haven't discussed yet before, which is to give a note a longer duration compared to its preceding notes. Now beat 3 got a note which was a half note and lasts 2 beats, as compared to the previous 4 notes which just last half a beat each. So that is our important strategy to highlight beat 3. And what did we do next in terms of what note gets that highlighted beat? We chose the note C. Now to understand the importance of C, let's look at the chord that it swapped. Now a phrase was swapped the chord A minor, and A minor's notes are A, C and E. A is the root note and hence very stable. C is a very important note because the interval A to C is called minor third, and the chord A minor actually gets its name from this interval. So this interval gives the A minor chord its characteristic sound or quality. So these two factors combine or collude to create this chromatic phrase, or rather make this chromatic phrase sound good against the backdrop of these two progressions. And the two factors are, if I recount it, it will be that we chose to highlight a particular beat which we knew was the strong beat in a 4-beat cycle. Having highlighted that with the choice of our strategy, which was to give it a longer duration, we also saw that that particular beat gets a very important note, which is part of the chord that it swept. Before I wrap this lesson up, I would also like to talk about one strategy that might not sound that appropriate. If we land the chromatic note A sharp on the strong beat, that is beat 3, or the beat that gets a longer duration, there's a good chance that it could sound stark or odd. And unless and otherwise we really intend to achieve that effect, it might not be such a good idea to employ. If you look at the previous phrase, which went G sharp, A sharp, B, C, and rearrange the last 3 notes such that the phrase now looks like G sharp, A, B, C, A sharp. Notice the chromatic note A sharp now lands on beat 3, and against the backdrop of these two progressions, you'll get to hear what I'm trying to say. So the first progression, which is C augmented, going to E minor, going to A minor. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. Notice how stark the note A sharp sounds against the backdrop of the chord A minor that I tried to swap. We'll go to the second progression, B diminished, going to E major, going to A minor. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. Notice how again the note A sharp sounds a bit odd compared to the chord A minor that was trying to swap. Okay, so now in the next lesson we'll be looking at major phrases and we'll try to look beyond.